helicopters come in playing Fortunate Son. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
love that idea. I love the idea of the auras just being propaganda, like Liberty Prime.
Yes.
100%.
All right,
And then-
guys, new episode. We're building Liberty Prime.
All right, yeah, scratch this. We'll just start over, right?
Yeah. Welcome to Beyond the Character Sheet, a podcast about creating and playing fun characters for Dungeons & Dragons, from stats to table antics. Each episode, we'll talk through character sheets, item sets, and points of personality that can make your next adventure one to remember. Welcome back, listener, to Beyond the Character Sheet. I'm your co-host, Sean. I'm here, as usual, with co-host TJ.
Oh, hello.
And today, we are, in fact, joined by the much-loved and very famous Nick. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Hi, happy to be here. Would be worried if I was famous, though.
We didn't reach super far out for our guest on this episode. Nick plays in a campaign with TJ and I. I think TJ and Nick, you guys play in a separate campaign, or at least you have in the past, right?
Yeah, we've played in a couple. Nick has been DM for me a couple times.
Yeah, we've been playing off and on for years.
Yeah, holy crap. It's actually been a while. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Well, very cool. So today we overflow with expertise. And for this episode, I wanted to bring to the table an idea I had a while ago for a Warforged Tank character. And I wanted to bring Nick on for this episode because in the campaign that currently all three of us are playing, Nick, you are playing a Warforged character, and I really actually like what you've done with it. It doesn't line up exactly with the idea that I brought, but I wanted you to come in and share yours because it's so good. I think other folks might like to hear it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to talk about my made-up guy.
Awesome. So for this one, I had the need to ruin D&D with more of my sci-fi nonsense. And I had played this video game, little indie title. Some of you guys may have heard of it. It was called XCOM. And there were some units you could get in XCOM called mech units. And they were your normal human units augmented with these big robotic suits. And a couple of things I found were interesting about them, besides the kind of dubious ethics at play. It was cool how you could use these mech units to support the rest of your team. The two that really jumped out at me was an AoE heal. Most units can carry an item they can use on themselves or another unit to heal damage. The mech unit just sprays it in a cloud, so everybody in a range gets it. So you could take these mechanized units, and they're too big to hide behind cover, but you could place them and turn them into cover. So that, coupled with the healing, I felt was a really cool way to have a soldier that's a heavy support. And so I was thinking, what if we made something similar for D&D? So that's my approach here, is to try to figure out a way to make a character that is really just here to support the rest of the party.
Yeah, I really like the idea.
Another idea that I had was the idea of a Warforged character that doesn't really have a mind of its own. And the more TJ and I workshopped that, it kind of came out that like, well, this would be kind of boring to play for a long period of time. So we're thinking, well, maybe you've got a one-shot and you want to play somebody for that. So we've got a Devotion Paladin build that TJ is going to show us for a big dumb lunk of metal that you can play, or we can go into an Artificer build for an actual like arced character that you could play for a bigger game. As a little bit of a teaser, Nick, can you give us the elevator pitch for Croaker?
Yeah, so Croaker is, the way I've described it in our game is 4 gay nerds and a robot, which in this case means there are 4 people that share a Warforged body as one character. And so the elevator pitch for them is just kind of all the weirdness that comes from having 4 people all very much mashed together.
Oh, well, very cool. Looking forward to talking about that later.
Basically, for the initial idea, I stuck with our pattern of doing one with rolled stats and one with standard array. And for the rolled, I decided to go with the Paladin, because the Paladin is typically a little multi-attribute dependent. So I rolled stats, and I ended up with some pretty good ones. I got 16, 15, 14 right off the bat, and then got a 12, 11, and an 8. So I ended up putting the 16 into strength, the 15 into charisma, and the 14 into constitution. I went with 12 intelligence because I thought, it's kind of a robot. I felt like that made sense. And then I was torn between the 11 and the 8 going into dexterity and wisdom. And ultimately, I put the 11 in dexterity and the 8 in wisdom. But really, I could make an argument for either.
But instead, you chose the fun option.
Yes, the fun option is to dump wisdom. Um,
That's just a rule of thumb, listener. Anytime you're looking for a dump stat, go with wisdom.
Yeah, I also enjoy dumping dexterity occasionally, but for specifically for characters who are going to be in heavy armor, and then I just roleplay that they have really slow reaction timing. But I also really like dumping wisdom.
The reason I enjoy it so much is purely just from a roleplay standpoint. It is extremely fun to do, even like moderate intelligence and very low wisdom.
Yeah.
Now, mechanically, maybe not the most fun, but I like rolling -1 insight checks.
I also feel like if you're looking for a relaxing role-playing experience, dump wisdom. You don't have to pretend to be smart. The character's an idiot.
Yeah, and there is something fun about being the one person who doesn't notice something happening, or being the one person who doesn't pick up on the fact that they're being lied to. There is something fun about that. But so ultimately, the racial ability score increases. I went with the +2 in strength, giving us an 18, and the +1 in charisma, giving us a 16, with charisma being the casting ability for paladins. Then, going through our build a little bit, at the beginning, you get proficiencies. I ended up going with athletics and intimidation, which was kind of silly, and I'll get to that later on. Then, being a paladin, you get your standard lay on hands. Second level, you get to pick a fighting style. I went with interception because we were going with that kind of protector type character. Remember, this is the one that we decided was going to be the mindless kind of defender who was just kind of following the orders of another member of the party.
Yes.
So I went with the interception fighting style because you can reduce the damage using your reaction that another person near you takes. And I like that a lot. Third level, you end up getting your Sacred Oath, and I went with Oath of Devotion, with the devotion being to that individual that you are serving. And I thought that was kind of a cool idea. Being devoted to an individual and getting power from that is kind of a cool concept to me.
You mentioned it for me, and I'm glad you did because I actually forgot during the intro. But yeah, another core to the genesis of this character was the idea that it doesn't make decisions on its own, especially in this context of a short game. For me, the role play hook was you're playing basically a steel defender.
Yeah.
You're playing a machine that has bonded to someone else in the player's party and does what they say, but generally only what they say. You could maybe make some arguments for, like, it has some basic routines, like it will preserve itself, but, like, it will only go where they go. It will only attack what they tell it to attack. It will only interact with the world in ways that some other player tells it to.
Yeah. Of course, at 5th level, you get your extra attack that all paladins get. Before that, ability score improvement or feat. There are a lot of feats that work here, really just any of the combat feats, depending on what weapon you use. I, with this character, would probably take a shield. And then you could do the, any of those combat feats. But I ended up just increasing our strength.
So I'm a little surprised we didn't go with constitution boosts.
Yeah, actually. So the Constitution was there and was represented, but was a little low.
Okay.
Being a 14. And I think I made that decision based on the casting ability of the Paladin. But realistically, you could flip the charisma and the Constitution and just not prioritize casting as much and prioritize being on the front line a lot more. That could also be an option, and I would like that. I would like that just as well.
Cool.
I think I was thinking more along the lines of I want my spells to be effective. But realistically, with a paladin, they don't always have to be. I mean, a lot of the spells that you cast, you're casting on allies, or you're using your spell slots for smites. So you don't really need a particularly high spell attack roll, and you don't need a particularly high spell saving throw DC. So yeah, you could prioritize Constitution over Charisma, and that could also work just as well. In some cases, even better.
Cool.
Especially if we're talking about this in the context of like a short form game or campaign.
Yeah.
Where you could even, that change could be like if there is kind of already a buff or debuffing kind of support person in the front lines or in your party, you could just fully pivot to be an assault weapon.
Yeah.
Just all of a sudden, yes, I'm protecting by ending my enemies.
Yeah. But then at level 6, in favor of the way that I built it, at level 6 you get the aura of protection that all paladins get, and that gives everyone, yourself and everyone within 10 feet of you, a bonus to their saving throws equal to your charisma modifier. So if you have a higher charisma, you and everyone within 10 feet of you is better at saving throws. But having a higher con and being on the front lines and still having that +2 to charisma is still a +2 to everybody's saving throws. And that's still really good. So prioritizing your con is still really good because that +2 to everybody's saving throws within 10 feet of you is still good. A +4 is better, but a +2 to everybody's saving throws within 10 feet of you is still good. Then at level 7, you get your aura of devotion, and that is everyone within 10 feet of you can't be charmed. And that, like, again, is set up to protect your person that you are devoted to, keeping their mind from being altered. And then at 8th level, we get another ability score improvement, and I put it into charisma, but like you brought up, you could also put it into con if you prioritized con. Or, as I said earlier, you could take any of the combat feats. And then at 10th level, everyone within 10 feet of you can't be frightened while you are conscious with the aura of courage. So once again, keeping your person that you're devoted to from having their mind affected in negative ways.
I love paladins, man.
Yeah. So yeah, like just having that little area around you where nobody can be charmed, nobody can be frightened. Any other saving throws have a +2 or a +4, depending on what you prioritized between con or charisma. Like, that's just really good. For background, I got a little tripped up. I ultimately landed on soldier.
Okay.
Because I think that soldier makes a lot of sense, that this Warforged could have been built as a soldier and designed as a soldier, and that's why it only takes orders from a specific person, or it could have been built as a guard of some kind. And remember earlier when I said that my skill proficiency choices were silly. Soldiers get athletics and intimidation. So I took athletics and intimidation, and now when you take the soldier background, you just pick 2 other skills because you already have those 2. So I really don't know what I would pick here, and I think there's a lot of roleplay opportunity into the identity of this particular unit with these skill choices.
I do have a little exercise for everybody here in the room. How can we reflavor our paladin spells as tech?
Oh, yeah. So I would do it in the lazy way, saying that while this is a machine, it is a magical mechanical device, and it is powered by magic and therefore can cast magic.
That works.
That's the lazy way that I would do it, but I like the idea of reflavoring things mechanically. I don't know, Nick, any ideas?
I mean, the first thing that kind of comes to my mind is you could have it be like swapping out whatever your quote unquote active weapon or active like kit is of like
Yeah, okay.
engaging protection module or engaging, assault fire module
Yeah.
for something like a divine smite or
Uh-huh.
things like that.
I was thinking, yeah, smite's the easy one. It's just a gun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could 100% turn these all into like different projectiles, other things that like are more mundane, like modern day military almost.
Yeah.
Sure. And then spell slots easily translate into ammunition.
Yeah.
I've only got so many uses of smite because I've only got so many canisters in my shoulder-mounted gun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we've got, let's see, Oath of Devotion is our subclass.
Yes.
And so with that, I mean, our oath spells are going to be...
Yeah. So we would get protection from evil and good and sanctuary. And then at 5th level, we would get lesser restoration and zone of truth. And then at 9th level, we would get beacon of hope and dispel magic.
Zone of truth is you just point a gun at someone.
Advanced interrogation technique.
Yes. And things like even beacon of hope and like aura type spells that are meant to buff your party, depending upon like the game you're playing in, that could be very much like you start blasting propaganda. Like, it's hard to
dig
be
it.
frightened when your national anthem is playing in the background as you smite your foes.
The helicopters come in playing Fortunate Son. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
love that idea. I love the idea of the auras just being propaganda, like Liberty Prime.
Yes.
100%.
All right, guys, new episode. We're building Liberty Prime.
All right, yeah, scratch this. We'll just start over, right?
Yeah.
Before I do continue on to the other build, I did briefly want to talk about equipment. I think for equipment, really any plus weapon, plus armor, plus shield will suffice.
And to throw in a fun little curveball, one of my favorite things about the Warforged is they have a whole thing with armor. If they're, they don't have any armor, they get a bonus. I think they actually just get that across the board now that I say
Yeah,
that.
they just get the bonus now. Yeah.
But if they put on armor that isn't a shield, they can't just take it on and off like a person does. They integrate it into their body. And I feel like that is a fun way of, especially if you have interesting, like, other enchantments. So, you could definitely do like your +1, +2 modifiers. But then if you get something like, I love Armor of Glamour, that changes what your armor looks like. And now you've got it integrated into a machine and it can't be taken away from you.
Yeah.
It's always yours essentially while you want it, and that could play into like, this is your camouflage paint coating or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
so if you can find any of those fun like extra enchantments you can add on to an item, maybe not to the extent of disregarding the boost to your stats, because that's always mechanically best, but
Yeah.
if big number isn't your only focus, just some of those fun, because the armor and stuff, especially since you get to wear heavy armor in this case,
Yeah.
you've got everything. You could do any type of armor.
I do like the idea of a Warforged integrating glamored armor into their body and then just like being a robot in a ball gown.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that.
Especially for like longer games too. It's like that could
Yeah.
be the thing slowly developing a bit of its own personality.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah,
Yes.
that would work.
Murderbot like to feel pretty.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the fact that they integrate their armor into their body, because that brings us into perfectly the other character idea, which is a Warforged that's more focused on intelligence and is an artificer. And I ended up going with the what is it called? The armorer. Yes, the armorer subclass. So I liked the idea, like you were talking about, Nick, of this armor being integrated into the Warforged's body. And then the Warforged themselves is tinkering on their own body and modifying themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I really like that idea of like I am my own mechanic.
Oh yeah.
Like I liked that kind of concept.
I really love that idea.
For the ability scores, for this one we went with standard array. For the 15 I put it in intelligence, the 14 I put in constitution, and the 13 I put into dexterity. And then 12 in wisdom, 10 in strength, and 8 in charisma. I actually liked the idea of dumping charisma on this one. And I don't know why. I could argue for also dumping dexterity, which I do like to do sometimes. But I kind of liked the idea of this one in particular being the smart but not sociable robot. The programming is there, the social etiquette is not.
And that makes sense. Charisma isn't a stat really that this character is going to use a lot except for saves.
Yeah. So I ended up doing that. And then for the racial increases, I did the +2 into constitution and +1 into intelligence, giving us a 16 in both, because I wanted this to be that kind of frontline fighter, the tanky damage dealing, just a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. First of all, with this one being a little smarter for skill proficiencies, I went with investigation and medicine as the artificer proficiencies. And then you also at level 1 get a tool proficiency. Backing up for a second, Warforged get a racial tool that they're proficient with. And for this one, I decided to go with Smith's tools.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I liked that idea of them like maybe even having their smithing tools incorporated into their own body. And then at level 1 as an artificer, you get more proficiencies in more tools. And I really just couldn't think of what would make sense. But I like the idea of maybe cartographers' tools, or maybe calligraphers' supplies, or perhaps cooks' utensils. I think that these things could give a lot of flavor and character, kind of to your choosing.
Definitely.
That would be the cook's tools.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to.
And then at level 2, of course, you start getting your infused items, which is when you can start making your own magic items. Then you get your Artificer Specialist, which is when we take Armorer. And with that, we end up getting the Arcane Armor, with which you pick an armor model. You pick either the Guardian or the Infiltrator, and with this we went with Guardian. And then each model includes a special weapon. When you attack with that weapon, you can add your intelligence modifier instead of strength or dexterity to the attack and damage rolls. So this just became a 2-stat character. That's why I focused so much on intelligence and constitution, because all of your damage is coming from your intelligence. And then you just stack constitution and put on some heavy armor. And now all of a sudden you're terrifying in combat with 2 stats. So with the Guardian, we get Thunder Gauntlets, which is a melee weapon while you aren't holding anything in your hands. It deals 1d8 thunder damage on a hit, keeping in mind that our 2 hit is improved by the intelligence, and then the damage is also improved by the intelligence. A creature hit by the gauntlet has disadvantage on attack rolls against targets other than you until the start of your next turn. So you are going in, hitting creatures with this gauntlet, and then that creature is now incentivized to attack you instead of anyone else.
And now we fit into the support role while still being a formidable attacker.
Yeah. And then the other benefit that they get is the defensive field. As a bonus action, you can gain temporary hit points equal to your level in this class. You lose the temporary hit points if you doff the armor, and you can use this bonus action a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus. And you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. So you can just go up, hit somebody with the Thunder Gauntlets, instigate them into attacking you, and then as a bonus action, you can give yourself temporary hit points equal to your Artificer class level and tank that hit. And that's not even accounting for the fact that we're wearing heavy armor, we're a Warforged, so we have a +1 to AC, we took a 16 in con. Like, this is just a formidable combat character already at 3rd level.
And I could see that really coming in handy. You know, let's say there's someone on your team that is, you know, maybe a little on the squishy side. Maybe you have a caster, you have someone who is about to take a devastating hit. This character could, you know, even without the bonus action of interception, like, here's a way you can pull aggro off of your team.
Yeah. At 5th level, you get extra attack, which is very nice. At 6th level, you get tool expertise, which is really good for a character that is making magic items and using their tools a lot. At 7th level, you get Flash of Genius as an artificer, which is really nice. You can use your reaction to add your intelligence modifier to any failed roll that someone within 30 feet of you makes.
So it's not limited to just you. You can give that to anybody.
Right. Anybody within 30 feet of you, when they make an ability check or a saving throw, you can use your reaction to add your intelligence modifier to the roll.
Okay.
So that, again, makes you a very good support character. At 9th level, that's when it becomes really cool. That's when the idea really kind of comes alive, because that is when you get armor modifications. And this says you learn how to use your Artificer infusions to specially modify your arcane armor. That armor now counts as separate items for the purpose of your infuse item feature. Armor is the chest piece, boots, helmet, and the armor's special weapon. Each of those items can bear one of your infusions. In addition, the maximum number of items you can infuse at once increases by 2, but those extra items must be part of your arcane armor. So you are just putting these magical infusions, you are turning mundane items magical because they are integrated into your body. And then, of course, our 10th level feature as a artificer is Magic Item Adept, which the main feature is you can attune to up to 4 magic items at once instead of the normal 3. And then the little flavor is if you craft a magic item with a rarity of common or uncommon, it takes you a quarter of the normal time, and it costs you half as much of the usual gold, which is also really cool.
Nice.
And then going into background, I was kind of leaning towards soldier for this one again, but I don't know. Do you guys have any other ideas for a background for this kind of character?
I'm kind of looking through a list here of the different ones. I mean, to throw out maybe an obvious one, especially if you're playing in the Ravnica setting, is an engineer.
Oh yeah,
This is 100% something that would fit into that world.
I was also leaning towards engineer, yeah.
yeah.
But I could even see things, I mean, based on like how you play the character of, they're very intelligence heavy. This is when you could get a sage or an acolyte even of,
Yeah,
especially acolyte of like God of the Forge of something like that, or God of Warfare.
yeah,
That adds, a little role play element to it while also still getting you some kind of interesting kind of proficiencies with that might not necessarily be what you pick, especially for like religion and stuff as an intelligence stat. But it's kind of fun to pick that up as like, I randomly know this
yeah.
because it's often overlooked. And then there was one more that I really loved and I scrolled past it and now I can't find it again.
Was it Fisher?
Yes, it was Fisher. I just saw that. Ghost of Saltmarsh is wild. Folk hero, actually. In a weird way, this is kind of the stuff legends are made of.
Yeah.
The robot that is powerful and, grumpy robot that is always working on itself, that shows up in the nick of time for support activities when, whatever place you're at requires support. For some reason that stuck in my head is like, it's weird. It doesn't really play along with really either of the proficiencies you would pick, but it's also kind of like you're already kind of picking a Warforged who's going to be kind of out there. You might as well could really double down on like, well, people know me because I'm kind of unique and different.
Yeah. I do really like that idea too. Yeah. And the last thing that I wanted to bring up is on the equipment side of this build, artificers make their own magic items. So
these are not insignificant either. I'm just looking through some of the infusions.
they're good.
I always overlook artificer because it's, not one of the core player's handbook classes, but goodness, some of these things are just good. You can even make up for we've dropped strength. Well, you can get the armor of magical strength, and now when you need to make those strength saves, guess what? You're adding your intelligence mod to that.
Yeah.
And you can even avoid being knocked prone. It's like a little side benefit as well. Like these are...
You have a kickstand.
Oh my god, that's so good.
Yep. That's really good. I am partial to the repulsion shield, which is basically a +1 shield that has 4 charges. And while holding it, the wielder can use a reaction immediately after being hit by a melee attack to expend one of the charges and push the attacker 15 feet away. And I really like that a lot.
I will say, as a DM, this item consistently kind of screws up my combat half the time because oftentimes, especially your grunts and things, they're using their full movement to get into things.
Yeah.
You do one attack, the artificer, the cleric, whoever's holding this damn shield, yeets them away, and now that extra attack can just go away now. Goodbye.
Yep.
I've seen it in the game that we all play in at least once or twice. Absolutely ruin our DM's plan.
Yep.
So what you're saying is, listener, if you have a DM you're really not fond of, take that repulsive shield.
Or if you're very fond of them and like to mess with them, because my players do that to me. TJ.
But yeah, I think that's pretty much what we got.
Like I was talking earlier, for the hook on this one, I was thinking of a Warforged, and I was specifically thinking of a Warforged that is like an early iteration of the Warforged as a race, as a thing in the world. So maybe this character is a Warforged that is not fully sentient. The idea would be the party would encounter it, and when it activates, it would bond to one of the other players, and it'll take very little direct action of its own volition outside of combat. It must be paired to a party member for instruction, basically, which I think would invite cooperation between players, or in more dire circumstances, some entertaining lack of cooperation.
Yeah.
I was like, you say dire, I say fun.
Yes.
No, I want to drive the super weapon.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's say we're focusing this character on a short-term game. Let's say we want somebody real quick. We can just dive into a one-shot. Quick poll: has anybody played a one-shot that actually only went one session?
No.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll just call it a shorter term game, one that has like a, a nearby end goal. So for a shorter game, this character will essentially be a player controlled steel defender. Like we said before, you're really just a stat block that would normally be controlled by another player. And in fact, you are basically controlled by another player. I had some trouble here because I think every good character needs an arc. And because we have created a character that is patently a non person, I kind of put myself in a corner for it. So we said, you know what, never mind. Let's just make this one fun. So the more I thought about it, I worried this could actually be kind of boring to play, try to think of some other hooks to make it interesting, but with a short narrative runtime, I think that will depend more on the interactions between the characters. So not so much this character's arc, but rather how they interplay with everybody else.
Yeah.
So you're in the middle of a pitch battle with, a lesser boss. You nitpick the controlling player for not using the correct command words. If you're idling in a town between adventures, maybe you accidentally break a shop's door because nobody told you to not walk through a wall and you're a giant machine that just walks through stuff. You can generally just be a goofy lunk whenever it suits, and then you can come in clutch for the party with some valuable paladin spells and a bucket of hit points later on.
Yeah, I like that. So as we were talking, I didn't think about this in concept, but have you ever seen the Jet Li movie Unleashed?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so kind of that.
Yeah.
Because I was just having this thought of, you were saying either the cooperation or a funny lack of cooperation.
Yes.
Like the one time in that movie where the guy who's like in charge of Jet Li's character gets the kicked out of him, but he can't reach the collar to take it off.
Yes.
So he just stands there and lets him get the beat out of him because he can't like give the command word.
Yeah. Yeah, the controlling player gets hit with silence and like, all right, well, the Warforged is out of the fight now because it doesn't know how to do anything if nobody told it what to do.
Yeah. And I think that could be pretty cool. And it also makes me think maybe it could be interesting for a longer game if the other players are trying to help it be its own person.
Yes.
Or trying to help it find an identity.
Which is where that glamour armor comes in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't mean to say that like you cannot use this in a long-term game, but
Right,
I would focus this on a short one just in case. I feel like that's where it's most appropriate. But yeah, absolutely. Like, roll this one in a big long game and see where you end up. Could be a great time.
Well, and that kind of segues into another way you can play it, or maybe a way to like kind of classify that kind of arc, especially for a longer game. Something like basically emergent artificial intelligence of you start as this very, I take orders and I follow the orders and I have certain self-preservation protocols, and then that is my character. But as things go on, as things break, as, this technological thing gets hit with magic, what if it starts to develop quirks?
Ooh.
Yeah.
What if occasionally its rigid programming fails and it has to kind of come up with something?
Yeah.
And that could even like mechanically be something like you are in the middle of a high-pitched battle, your control rod gets hit with essentially silence. No one can give you commands. You decide in that moment you're going to do something anyways. That's like a character moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That can kind of kickstart like, well, what the heck do I do now?
Yep.
Or rather the party going, well, what does this mean?
Yeah.
What happens when the murder robot becomes sentient?
Yeah, and it goes into, you can play it like, oh, I, as this machine, have been told in these situations to do this, and I have learned from that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now the Warforged is learning.
Yeah.
And then the Geth ask why they must work, and next thing you know, squids are coming out of the sky to kill all of us.
Yes.
Especially if we're in like standard D&D setting, like Forgotten Realms, all of a sudden we're like high fantasy adventurers and we're dealing with a robot that's learning all these different things and making decisions and has all this advanced technology and we don't understand it.
Yep.
I can see that being funny and that kind of lack of cooperation, as exactly what you guys are describing. This machine is learning what to do in certain situations. Let's say then the party comes up to a situation where they don't want to fight because, the odds are against them or they need to maintain some political allegiance. But the machine recognizes this as a scenario that calls for violence and it just goes off.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So that doesn't need to be the mindless playstyle does not need to be restricted to a short-term game. You actually can take that and expand it out in a way that could be entertaining and, dare I say, meaningful.
Yeah, yeah, I really like this idea.
So if we want a real arc, we first need someone capable of an arc. And for this character, I would take more inspiration, that is plagiarism, from a film I saw a while ago called Nine. In this movie, Nine, an engineer was commissioned to create a machine that turned out to be very destructive. And since human extinction was inevitable, this engineer created a way to preserve human consciousness in other machines. And they stored facets of their own personality in a series of little robot dolls. Now for this character, this could be some historical figure already in the setting, commissioned or forced to create some kind of sentient weapon or some kind of intelligent weapon that's capable of learning and acting on its own. And either as an act of sabotage or, desperation, they kind of Control-C, Control-V their own brain into that Warforged. And I think that explicitly gives the player more opportunity to create an arc and a character rather than just relying on the machine. And that also fits, like you were saying earlier, Nick, with the folklore background. Now I have a real person in this machine that makes it even more special.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you referenced this movie because I adore this movie.
Wasn't it good?
Yes.
And so that was really kind of the idea I was working with for this line. So, giving this character an underlying consciousness should allow the player to craft an arc of their own, either in place of or in tandem with whichever party member they pair with. So you could still do the pairing here, basically. And then, as we were saying with the mindless version, the inside consciousness kind of comes out. So with that underlying consciousness, we can introduce maybe questions for the character within the Warforged. Does this character want to take revenge on the people responsible? Do they say, hey, I'm living in a weapon now, I'm going to go get them back? Does this character just want to reunite with their family? Maybe they had to do it so they could escape some kind of complex, and now they're just trying to find their way back to civilization. Does this character actually really like being a living weapon and just wants to roam around leveling cities? We don't always have to play good guys. Or, I think this is a point where a little tasteful amnesia could really set the character up in an interesting position. You can either take them in that direction of, hey, being a robot is pretty cool, or what do you mean I'm a robot? As the consciousness develops, you, the player, can decide how they feel about it. And that could give you, I think, a lot of options.
Yeah, I like all of these ideas. I'm also some of the things that it's reminding me of a little bit is the synths from Fallout, very specifically Nick Valentine. And there was another thing that it reminded me of, and I lost it because I have a human brain. So you
I
remember. I remember. Warhammer, Mechanicus.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
From the moment I understood the weakness of my flesh,
yeah,
it disgusted me.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe this character is. I'm not a Warhammer guy. I don't know who the major figurehead was for the Mechanicus, but yeah, maybe you're like kind of on the forefront of that major paradigm shift. Like, no, we should all be doing this.
Yeah.
So another side note that I've written down here: if it has a human mind in it, it can be tricked. So what if this character was built for a specific purpose and that purpose no longer exists? Or they're built for a specific purpose and the player character they bond with tricks them into thinking that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
There's a recent Snyder movie called Rebel Moon, and I'm not going to speak to the quality of it because I don't watch movies myself. I just steal opinions from the internet. Didn't sound like it was very good. But there's a robot character in that movie. He's a machine designed to protect the royal family. And at some point in that movie's history, the royal family was assassinated. So now you have this machine whose job is to protect royalty, but there's no more royalty. What does it do?
Yeah.
So thinking back to, well, what if your other players aren't nice people? If they find a machine whose purpose is to protect royalty at any cost, well, they could just lie and say they're royalty. How would the machine know?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Because there's even like implications of like what happens when the jig is up.
Yeah.
That could be so fun to roleplay.
Yeah, you want to talk about some fun lack of cooperation. What happens when the killing machine realizes you've been lying to it for however long?
And that brings up a really, probably my favorite aspect of the conversation of identity is, there is the, what is it that makes me who I am? But my favorite aspect of the conversation of identity is, who am I once I lose the thing I thought made me who I am?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that works really well. I think an enterprising DM could also create story hooks for this character. I think there are ways to make it interesting, not just from the player perspective, but from the DM's perspective. So, since this is, as I said, in my mind, this is an early iteration of the Warforged. So maybe this setting is one where the Warforged are either brand new or they're lost tech. Maybe this is the last Warforged. In either case, it's kind of rare and it's incredibly valuable as a research token or maybe as a weapon for some faction. The idea is that this machine that the character is playing is desirable, either because it's the first one and it is viewed as valuable in a setting where there's a lot of political strife. You know, maybe everybody is on the verge of their version of a world war, and whoever gets this soldier technology first is going to have a big leg up. Maybe they're the last ones. You know, maybe there already was some big cataclysmic world event, and some faction on the map either wants to reclaim the technology or destroy it outright so it never happens again.
So in Final Fantasy IX, there is a main character named Vivi who has this personality and is very much a unique person, an individual, right? But later on, you find kind of constructs that look just like him, and these are just kind of mindless killing machines. And he is, they never fully explain it, but he is some sort of early model that had personality, that had individuality, and then he's encountering this kingdom producing en masse these things that look just like him and using them for warfare. What if we actually combined these two ideas, one of them player side and one of them DM side, where the player is playing as the one with the personality and with the individuality, and then they start encountering other, maybe like you said, maybe they're valuable to this faction in the setting because they are the first one, but some faction in the setting is mass producing more of them that don't have any individuality or personality. And now this character has to contend with the fact that they are artificially made just like these other things, but these other things aren't anything like them.
I think that'd be really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you bring it up because it lets me segue right into my my points for how do you end this character? Where does this arc end? And sorry, listeners, that I keep having downer story arcs over here. I think I'm just a miserable person. But we can go to like the Iron Giant or Terminator 2 for this one, since we're out stealing properties anyway.
Everything is stolen.
Yeah. But we go to these other properties and we see this kind of same idea. Well, what happens if the weapon understands that it's a weapon and decides the best thing for it is to not be here?
Yeah.
And so the party spends a whole campaign either watching the machine develop its own identity or watching the actual person that might be trapped inside grow and develop and get to the end, and the conclusion is we have to destroy the machine. Now, there's also the Pixar ending. You could also flip this around and come up with something happier. Like, I don't know, maybe maybe it comes out to be you could reassemble it as a really effective bread oven, or something cute and useful that kind of diffuses the tension and says, okay, well now no one's going to be looking for it because it's no longer a war machine, but it didn't have to be destroyed.
Or playing a little bit off of your idea, maybe the machine in its journey, learning and developing relationships with these people, is put in a position of self-sacrifice and truly believes, because it has developed its own identity and it has developed this personality, it believes that it is the most expendable member of the party.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And puts itself in that situation to be the one that takes the fall, kind of.
Now, so we've kind of got we've got the sad ending, and we've got the somewhat self-sacrificing, maybe happier ending. I'd like to maybe put out there a third alternative, which is the enigmatic ending.
Ooh.
One of my favorite things about the Warforged is mechanically, there is no maximum limit to your age. Like, you are effectively immortal. In one of my favorite series of all time, The Wheel of Time, there is a character who, at the end of 14 books of fantasy, is essentially given the opportunity to walk the earth, be among the people, as essentially maybe a protector, maybe a devil, an angel, a whatever. You essentially are set free with essentially just a consciousness and effective immortality. And if you're at the end of a campaign, probably a significant amount of power.
Yeah.
What happens when you're immortal and you might even know magic to disguise yourself? What happens
Ooh.
then when you walk among the people forever?
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite things because it's the only real class in Dungeons and Dragons that effectively makes you immortal from level one. A level one Warforged character can do nothing but hide in a hill for the rest of eternity and live. And I've found that, and in kind of some of the characters I've played with that similar sort of mentality, especially the one that I play now, that's kind of like if I have to think of a perfect ending, that's kind of the ending I pick.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, you're effectively immortal. What do you do with that? What's your postscript?
Yeah, that was fun. That was a good one. So, Nick, do you mind running us through Croaker?
Yeah, so Croaker, one, just to run through the mechanics real quick. Right now, currently level 6, Warforged, Clockwork Soul Sorcerer. And the initial idea for this, so one, I've been trying to just, as I get the chance to play characters instead of run games, I try and pick something, both typically a race and a class that I've not played before. I want to like kind of constantly be trying out new and interesting things. And so I landed on Warforged. What drew me initially was actually the age stat thing, that the effect that they throw out of, oh, you're effectively immortal and you're made of metal. And I looked at a lot of the other benefits not as necessarily like ways to improve like the thing that the class is doing that I would pick, but rather ways to make up for weaknesses. So that's why I picked Sorcerer for this, because you get the base ability score increase to Con plus one additional ability score of your choice. Well, as a spellcaster, I'm probably going to pick my spellcasting stat. And then that Con helps me, one, make my saves when I make spell saves, and two, keeps me somewhat beefier. And then going into like the armor class and things like that, I'm not wearing armor as a sorcerer typically, which means that +1 to armor class is significant. Especially early on, it was often the thing that kept me from being hit. And then from there, it was taking a lot of the other smaller effects of the race itself and trying to find what's the interesting take on this. So in our DM setting, the reason Croaker is the way they are, they're kind of that ladder, kind of that nine comparison that you made of they are multiple people put into a robot. They're multiple people put into a frame. And so the character itself is, like I said, 4 gay nerds, essentially 4 people in sort of a polyamorous relationship that experimenting with this ancient frame, something happens, a little bit of that convenient amnesia. They come to as 4 people in one robot. And a lot of what draws me back to the character just all the time in my moments of rest is you're taking 4 people who were pretty young for the most part, that were students in magic, and you're taking away their physicality and you're shoving them into a robot. And there's just so much there for me to play with. Common thing that shows up in our game is playing with the Warforged not needing to drink. Well, if we're essentially playing 4 college students shoved into a robot.
Where's the drink?
Exactly. And that's a subquest for the character, is some NPC that our DM so generously threw out there, like managed to make it work once, of a consumable that lets the robot feel like they've been drinking. Well, now we're going to chase that. And that's like a subquest that we're doing. So a lot of my characters, and Croaker especially, is it's usually taking these small mechanical things that might seem inconsequential and like pushing them as much as possible. So a lot of what draws me to the character is like exploring, we had biology, now we don't. We were a like polyamorous group. Now we are still that, but we're all shoved together in a very tight quarters.
Now we can't do the fun part.
Exactly. And so it's and you don't need to sleep either. You do need to take long rests, but you don't go unconscious. You see and hear everything all the time.
Absolutely horrifying.
That is what draws me. Is it's awesome because it's like you're effectively immortal, and what a curse. What an awful thing to have removed from you. Do you find the silver lining like I think the character Croaker I'm playing does? Or do you fully lean into just the horror of it all? going further is talking about like emergent personalities and stuff. The name Croaker is an amalgamation of four characters, but Croaker is also a character. When the four of them share the frame together, they talk as one, they speak as one. They can definitely speak individually and do a lot, but there's also the matter of, well, now there's nothing really separating us from being four people. Now we're one person. What happens when you start to blend those things, and then it gets just grayer and muddier as well. And so yeah, and then going into like why I picked sorcerer. One, I'd never played a sorcerer class, but two, the Clockwork Soul sorcerer felt like something that would really play into just what I wanted the character to do, which is it's a lot more buff and debuff, which as a spellcaster in 5e, I love. It's kind of one of my favorite things. I'm not doing tons of damage. I'm not wiping out rows of enemies. What I'm doing is I'm casting haste on the barbarian and watching him do all the work. And then with sorcerer, you get your meta magic and stuff, and basically a lot of these buff debuff spells are single target, leaning heavily mechanically into the meta magic feat of I forget the name of it. Pick a second target if you have a single target spell. It makes a lot of these buffs 100% better. You're picking a second person to give haste to, a second person to give blindness to. That also, the mechanics of just how that class works plays into we're a clockwork being. We're all mechanical. There's magic in there, of course, but when you get down to it, we're just a bunch of walking metal. And then finally, I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about items and stuff. We've touched on a lot of the ones that I think would be essential. For a sorcerer, you've got your Bloodwell Vial, which makes all your stuff better. But a lot of the stuff that I've really leaned into and like have asked our DM for, it's all utilitarian stuff. It's stuff to like, outside of my fun items of like my immovable rod, my bag of holding, your things that add more single target uses, or in this case, even things that make up for my lack of damage with like a necklace of fireballs.
Yeah.
And so it's like I have these on deck if I really need them, but the core of the character isn't damage. It's making our allies or our enemies do the things that they're doing better or worse, and sort of bringing kind of like a balance, which that the class kind of subtly, like kind of relies on a bit of. It's not like you go all in on like good or evil. There's order and there's balance.
Yeah.
So yeah, when picking items and stuff, things that like give you extra single targets, buffs, debuffs. I'm also very much just a fan of, hey, I'm still a spellcaster. Give me that cloak of protection, please. But yeah, that's my little made up guy, and it all started really with one line in the Warforged race of you don't have to eat, drink, or breathe. What does that mean?
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for letting me info dump. I appreciate it.
I like Croaker a lot. I almost feel sad for taking away his best friend, even though it is temporarily.
Well, thank you again, Nick, for joining us today. That was a lot of fun. It was actually really valuable to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Maybe we'll do it again in the near future.
Literally whenever.
Awesome. And TJ, thank you again for doing all the actual legwork for ginning them up.
Yup.
Yeah.
And I guess we will see you guys next time.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Character Sheet. We hope this episode has inspired you to create and play someone fun. This show's music was created and provided by Nicholas Mason. Find his work on youtube.com/@NicholasMason. Contact us at btcs.hosts@gmail.com with your questions and comments. Join us again next episode for more Legends in the Making. The mech unit is mobile, but is too big to take cover, but they can be positioned and then turned into cover. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you had an inorganic character in a tabletop game? I might have to throw my cat out because she is screaming at the door. Give me a second. Well, I should have made a note for when I cut.